Military signaling today is no longer confined to quiet briefings behind closed doors or technical reports buried in defense departments. It has become a public performance, a carefully staged display designed to project strength, intimidate rivals, reassure allies, and rally domestic audiences. When officials speak about hidden missiles or sophisticated strike capabilities, they are not simply describing hardware, they are shaping perceptions. This is the politics of spectacle, where power is communicated not only through action, but through headlines, press statements, and strategic leaks that dominate the global news cycle. The objective is not always immediate confrontation, but psychological positioning, creating uncertainty in opponents while cultivating a sense of control and readiness at home. In this theater of power, language becomes a weapon as influential as any missile system because it frames reality for millions of people watching from afar. This form of signaling also plays directly into international markets and economic behavior. Investors react to military rhetoric. Oil prices fluctuate with every hint of escalation, and shipping routes become riskier when tensions rise. A single statement about advanced weaponry can move billions of dollars across financial systems within hours. That is not accidental. It reflects a deliberate understanding that modern geopolitics operates at the intersection of military strength and economic influence. Governments know that fear and uncertainty can be leveraged to reshape negotiations, influence trade relationships, and alter diplomatic leverage without firing a single shot. The performance is calculated, timed, and targeted to produce maximum impact across multiple sectors at once. At the same time, military signaling serves domestic political purposes. Leaders often use displays of strength to divert attention from internal economic struggles, rising unemployment, inflation, or social unrest. By shifting public focus toward external threats, governments can unify populations under the banner of national security while postponing difficult conversations about inequality, governance failures, and social investment. The narrative becomes one of survival and defense rather than accountability and reform. This strategy is not unique to any one country. It is a recurring pattern across political systems where power is maintained through controlled fear and managed confrontation. Another crucial dimension of this theater is the role of media amplification. Sensational headlines, dramatic imagery, and urgent language transform complex geopolitical dynamics into simplified narratives of heroes and enemies. This reduces space for nuance, diplomacy, and critical debate instead of asking why tensions persist or how they can be resolved. Audiences are encouraged to choose sides and emotionally invest in escalation. The cycle feeds itself. Political statements generate media attention. Media attention increases public pressure, and public pressure justifies further displays of strength. What we are witnessing is not merely the movement of weapons, but the movement of narratives, the construction of power through perception, and the strategic use of uncertainty as leverage in a global system already strained by economic instability, regional conflicts, and shifting alliances, where every signal is carefully calculated to reshape the balance of influence while maintaining the appearance of dominance and control in a world that is increasingly unpredictable and volatile and shaped by competing interests that extend far beyond the battlefield and into the daily lives of ordinary people who are forced to absorb the consequences of decisions made far above them in rooms they will never enter and discussions they will never hear, and strategies they will never be allowed to influence while the performance continues to unfold on the global stage without pause. The cycle of sanctions and militarization is one of the most destructive feedback loops in modern geopolitics. It begins with economic pressure presented as a peaceful alternative to war, yet in practice it often functions as a form of collective punishment that squeezes entire populations rather than political elites. When sanctions are imposed, currencies weaken, essential goods become more expensive, and public frustration grows. Governments under pressure respond not by retreating, but by hardening their positions, framing resistance as national pride and survival. What follows is not de escalation, but defiance, and defiance becomes the justification for further military preparation. As economic pathways close, military pathways open. Restricted access to global markets pushes states to invest more heavily in domestic arms production and strategic deterrence. Defense budgets expand while social programs shrink, and national priorities are reshaped around security rather than development. This transformation is often sold to the public as necessary protection, but it also locks societies into long-term militarized economies where jobs, research funding, and political influence become tied to weapons manufacturing. Once this structure is in place, stepping away from confrontation becomes economically difficult because too many institutions and interests depend on continued tension to survive. The most profitable actors in this cycle are rarely the citizens who endure inflation and shortages. Instead, arms manufacturers, private contractors, and defense linked corporations benefit from rising demand and government spending. Each new round of sanctions and countermeasures generates new contracts, new testing programs, and new justifications for technological expansion. War may be devastating, but preparation for war has become a business model. This creates a dangerous incentive structure where peace is financially inconvenient and instability is economically rewarding for those positioned at the top of the system. At the human level, the cost is far more severe. Families struggle with rising food prices, workers face shrinking purchasing power, and young people grow up in environments shaped by fear and uncertainty. Infrastructure projects are delayed, healthcare systems are underfunded, and education budgets are sacrificed to maintain military readiness. The promise that sanctions will bring quick political change rarely materializes, yet the long-term social damage remains. Entire generations are forced to carry the burden of decisions made in distant power centers where the immediate consequences are rarely felt. This cycle also hardens international divisions. Sanctions push countries to seek alternative alliances, parallel financial systems, and new regional blocs that fragment the global economy. Trust erodes, cooperation weakens, and diplomacy becomes more difficult because every interaction is filtered through suspicion. What was once economic pressure becomes strategic rivalry, and what was once rivalry becomes preparation for confrontation. The result is a world where escalation feels normal, military budgets grow without serious debate, and societies become accustomed to living under permanent tension while the underlying problems of inequality, development, and stability remain unresolved and unaddressed and continuously postponed. As the cycle repeats itself again and again across different regions and generations and political eras without meaningful interruption. When tensions rise between major geopolitical players, the impact is never confined to borders or battle maps. The modern world is deeply interconnected, and every signal of conflict sends shockwaves through global markets. Energy prices are often the first to react. Even the suggestion of instability in the Middle East can push oil prices upward, affecting transportation costs, manufacturing expenses, and household energy bills across continents. What begins as a regional political dispute quickly transforms into a worldwide economic burden carried by consumers who have no influence over the decisions that triggered it. Shipping and trade routes are another critical pressure point. Heightened security risks, increase insurance costs for cargo vessels, slow down deliveries, and force rerouting through longer and more expensive paths. Ports become more cautious, customs procedures tighten, and supply chains already weakened by previous crises face new disruptions. This results in shortages, delayed production, and higher prices for essential goods ranging from food to medical supplies. The consequences are especially severe for developing economies that rely heavily on imports and lack the financial buffers needed to absorb sudden market shocks. Inflation becomes an unavoidable outcome of these disruptions. As energy and transportation costs rise, businesses pass those expenses on to consumers. Wages, however, rarely increase at the same pace, creating a widening gap between income and living costs. Families are forced to make difficult choices, cutting back on nutrition, education, and health care. Small businesses struggle to survive as operating costs rise while consumer spending power declines. What appears on the news as a distant geopolitical standoff quietly reshapes daily life in households around the world. Financial markets also respond to geopolitical instability with volatility and uncertainty. Investors seek safe assets, capital flows shift rapidly, and currencies in vulnerable economies weaken. This instability discourages long term investment in infrastructure and development projects, slowing economic growth in regions that need it most. Governments facing capital outflows are often forced to increase interest rates or cut public spending, further tightening economic conditions for ordinary citizens. The ripple effects extend beyond immediate crises and can shape national economies for years. Perhaps most troubling is the way repeated cycles of tension normalize economic disruption. Societies become accustomed to price spikes, supply shortages, and market instability as routine features of global life. Emergency measures become permanent policies, and temporary crises turn into long term structural challenges. Instead of building resilient economic systems focused on sustainability and shared prosperity, nations remain trapped in reactive modes, constantly adjusting to the next geopolitical shock. This pattern reinforces inequality between wealthy nations that can absorb these impacts and poorer countries that are pushed deeper into debt and dependency, creating a global imbalance that grows more severe with every new escalation and every renewed wave of uncertainty and every strategic confrontation that sends fresh tremors through the interconnected economic system of the modern world. Fear has always been one of the most powerful tools in politics, but in the modern era, it has been refined, packaged, and strategically deployed with remarkable precision. When governments emphasize external threats, they create a climate where extraordinary measures suddenly appear reasonable. Military budgets expand with minimal resistance, emergency laws are passed with limited debate, and public scrutiny is softened by the constant reminder of danger. Fear reshapes priorities. shifting attention away from social needs and economic reform toward security narratives that promise protection while demanding sacrifice. This emotional mobilization is not accidental. Political leaders and institutions understand that fear unifies populations more effectively than optimism. It simplifies complex realities into clear oppositions of us versus them, reducing space for nuanced discussion or critical questioning. When people feel threatened, they are more likely to accept authority, tolerate restrictions, and support aggressive policies. In this environment, dissent is often framed as weakness or disloyalty, discouraging open debate and narrowing the democratic space where alternative solutions might emerge. Media ecosystems play a central role in amplifying this dynamic. Continuous news cycles thrive on urgency, conflict, and dramatic framing. Alarming headlines generate attention, and attention drives engagement. As a result, stories emphasizing danger and confrontation are often prioritized over those exploring diplomacy, compromise, or long-term solutions. The repetition of threatening narratives creates a sense of permanent crisis, conditioning audiences to expect instability and to view escalation as inevitable. Over time, this erodes the public's ability to imagine peaceful alternatives. Fear also becomes a financial instrument. Defense spending increases generate lucrative contracts, technological investments, and employment opportunities tied directly to security industries. When fear dominates political discourse, it unlocks funding streams that would otherwise face strong resistance. Schools, hospitals, and public infrastructure compete for limited budgets, while military programs receive rapid approval in the name of national survival. This imbalance reflects a deeper shift in values, where preparedness for conflict is rewarded more consistently than investment in human well being. Perhaps the most damaging consequence of fear based politics is the way it accelerates confrontation. When every action by a rival is interpreted as hostile and every response is framed as necessary defense, escalation becomes a self fulfilling prophecy. Diplomatic gestures are viewed with suspicion, compromise is labeled as weakness, and restraint is interpreted as vulnerability. This environment leaves little room for de escalation, even when all sides recognize the high costs of conflict. Instead, leaders are pushed to appear strong rather than wise, decisive rather than thoughtful, aggressive rather than cooperative. The result is a political culture where stability is sacrificed for the appearance of dominance and where long term peace is repeatedly postponed in favor of short term displays of power that satisfy immediate political needs while deepening global insecurity and reinforcing a cycle that feeds on itself and continues to expand across regions and generations and political systems without pause. The idea of security has been narrowly defined for far too long, reduced to the size of military budgets, the range of missiles, and the strength of deterrent strategies. Yet true security is not experienced in military parades or defense reports. It is experienced in stable households, reliable healthcare systems, accessible education, and meaningful employment. When people have economic stability and social protection, societies become more resilient to both internal and external shocks. Redefining security requires shifting focus away from constant preparation for war and toward the everyday conditions that allow communities to thrive. Economic stability is a foundational pillar of real security. When workers earn fair wages and have access to affordable housing and basic services, Social tensions decrease and political extremism loses its appeal. Inequality, on the other hand, creates fertile ground for unrest and radicalization. Investments in infrastructure, renewable energy, and sustainable industries not only create jobs but also reduce dependence on volatile resource markets that often become sources of geopolitical conflict. By prioritizing long term development over short term military advantage, nations can build economic systems that support peace rather than competition. Diplomacy and regional cooperation are equally essential. Many conflicts persist not because solutions are impossible, but because dialogue is treated as weakness and compromise as surrender. Cooperative frameworks for trade, environmental protection, and cultural exchange create shared interests that make war less attractive. When neighboring countries depend on one another for prosperity, stability becomes a collective goal rather than an individual strategy. This interconnectedness transforms rivals into stakeholders in mutual success rather than perpetual adversaries. Another overlooked dimension of security is environmental sustainability. Climate change, water scarcity, and food insecurity are already destabilizing regions and intensifying competition over resources. Addressing these challenges through international collaboration is not just an environmental priority, it is a security necessity. Preparing for climate resilience, disaster response, and sustainable agriculture protects populations from crises that no military solution can resolve. These investments strengthen societies in ways that weapon systems cannot. At its core, redefining security is about redefining values. It requires political courage to redirect resources from arms production to human development, from confrontation to cooperation, and from fear based narratives to hope driven policies. This transformation is not easy, but it is necessary for a future that prioritizes dignity, stability, and shared prosperity. When societies measure success by the well being of their people rather than the size of their arsenals, they create a foundation for lasting peace and collective progress that extends beyond borders and generations and ideologies and power structures and historical rivalries, and toward a world where safety is built through opportunity and justice and mutual respect rather than constant preparation for conflict.